Hi everyone, it's Pastor Josh, and I am here for our story time for the first Sunday of Advent. It's the beginning of our new church year, the beginning of the season of Advent. And if you listened in on the children's message this week, you know that Advent is a season of waiting, right? It's a season of waiting for Jesus to come, a season of waiting for Christmas. And so our story this week is a story of waiting. It is called The Butter Man, and it's written by Elizabeth and Alalou, illustrated by Klear, Essakalli, and it takes us to a different culture, and we're going to learn a little bit about that culture in the story. Takes us to the culture of the people in Morocco. It's a country in Africa. And so there are some words in this story that are in a different language, and I'll try to explain those words as the story goes along, but I think you'll catch on pretty quickly. It's also a beautifully illustrated book, so I'm going to take time to read the story and then show you each page after I'm done reading it. It's a beautiful book, and it's a story about waiting. So listen for the things in the story that the characters are waiting for, and I hope you enjoy it. I love this story. It's an awesome story. It's great for all ages, so I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So this is, again, The Butter Man. Every Saturday evening, my Baba makes a big plate of couscous for our family to eat for dinner. Okay, so there's two words right away. Baba, you might guess, is the word for father in this story, right? We might say daddy in English or papa. Baba is the word in this language. And then couscous, I don't know if you ever had that to eat. Couscous, it's a grain kind of like rice. It's different though. You have to season it because it doesn't taste very interesting on its own. But it's the dish that is central to this culture. So couscous is something that is really tasty in this culture. All right. So every Saturday evening, my Baba makes a big plate of couscous for our family to eat for dinner. On Saturdays, my mama is always at work, so I stay in the kitchen while Baba is getting the couscous ready. Baba spends a very long time preparing the couscous. He uses a special pot that he brought all the way from Morocco in his suitcase. It's a big round pot with two parts. The bottom part is deep and wide. That's where he puts the meat and the vegetables and spices. The top part is round and shallow and has holes in it. That's where he puts the couscous. But the food cooks very slowly. As our house fills up with the fragrant, special Saturday night smell, I can feel my tummy rumbling as I get hungrier and hungrier. But I don't bother asking Baba for a snack. He wants me to save my appetite. Makes me hungry just thinking about it. Doesn't it make you hungry? Is there a special meal that your family makes on maybe special nights of the week? Just like this family makes couscous on Saturday nights. One day when I was very hungry, I kept hanging around the kitchen asking my Baba for something to eat. No, he said, you must wait for the couscous to be ready. But I'm starving, I said. Baba looked at me for a long minute as if he were looking at me, but looking right past me at the same time. That's the look he gets when he's thinking about Tamazirt. That's what Baba calls the place where he comes from, far away in Morocco. He didn't stop what he was doing. He kept right on working the couscous, dumping the grains into a bowl, sprinkling them with water, and fluffing them with his fingers. Then Baba put the grains of couscous back into the pot to steam some more, and he took me on his knee and he said, Nora, let me tell you the story of the Butter Man. You can see them in their kitchen. So here's the story of the Butter Man. When I was a little boy about your age, there was a time when my family didn't have much to eat. It hadn't rained in Tamazirt for a very long time, and that meant the crops didn't grow. Every year in the spring, your Alalou harvested wheat, then took it to the threshing ground to thresh it, then to the miller to grind it into flour. Your Alalou would use that flour to make the grains of couscous, rolling it out in a flat basket with the palms of her hands. So Alalou and Alalou would sort of be like our way of saying grandpa and grandma. Your Alalou always also used the flour to make flat loaves of bread that she cooked on a smooth clay pot over the fire in our kitchen. But that spring, the wheat didn't grow thick and green. It was little and stunted and brown. That year, the bags that came from the miller were not full, and there weren't many of them. After a while, your Alalou started to make the plates of couscous smaller, and the loaves of bread smaller too. Your Alalou used to make butter for us, and I loved the way after I dipped my bread into it, it made a slippery feeling on the roof of my mouth. Then one day my father led our cow off to the souk to be sold, like the marketplace. After the cow was gone, there was no more butter. A few weeks after the cow was gone, your Alalou left too. He went across the mountains to look for work and left me home with your Alalou. The last sack of flour sat in the corner. Now it was only half full. After that, it seemed I was hungry all the time, as if there was a little mouse gnawing a hole in my insides. For a while, there was still a little bit of butter left, the spicy udi, the word for butter, that my mother had saved, but pretty soon there was only bread, and never enough bread, never enough to make me feel like my stomach was full. One day I was very hungry, and when I looked at the piece of bread my mother gave me, I knew it wasn't big enough, especially not without a little butter to dip it in. It was hard and just a little bigger than the palm of my hand. "Ma," I said, "don't you have just a little bit of butter for me?" But I knew that the butter jar stood empty. I had run my fingers across the ridged bottom of the clay jar and licked them long after any taste of butter was gone. "Ali," she said, "why don't you go outside and wait for the butter man? If he passes, ask for a little bit of butter to go with your bread." Tell you, if you've ever had fresh baked bread with like really good butter, it is the most delicious thing. It makes me hungry just thinking about it. I took my bread and ran outside, down the steep hill by our house. I jumped over the stream that had dried to just a trickle and ran out to the dirt road. I climbed up on a big rock that was nice and warmed by the sun and waited for the butter man. Can you see where he's waiting on the rock? Lots of people came down that road. Sidi Lou was walking back from the fields, a shovel thrown over his shoulder. Fadma and Ito came back from the hills where they were gathering kindling. They had big piles of sticks strapped to their backs. Moha and Lachen, wearing woolen robes and plastic sandals, came up from the spring carrying sweating clay jugs of water slung over their backs. The big red truck carrying passengers from Bumane came by, kicking up dust that made me spit and diesel fumes that carried the important air of faraway places. You could see the bus and all the different people carrying lots of different things. "Did the butter man come?" Alalou asked. "No," I shook my head. "What happened to your bread?" she asked. "I ate it." Alalou smiled at me and shook her head. "You should have waited for the butter man a little longer." Every day after that, when Mahalou pressed a small piece of bread into the palm of my hand, she said, "Run along now, Ali. Run along and wait for the butterman." Every day I ran down the hill to my perch to wait for the butterman. And every day first I licked, then I nibbled on the morsel of bread as I watched the people of the village go by, forgetting for a while the gnawing feeling in my stomach, and every day I returned empty-handed. No more bread, no butterman. One day the piece of bread my mother had given me was so small I could close my fingers all the way around it. And it was so hard that when bread was plenty, I would have tossed it to the cow to eat. I tried and tried to save it for the butterman, but that day I couldn't lick and I couldn't nibble. 2 quick bites and the tiny piece of bread was already gone. There was nothing left. Nothing but the familiar creases on the palm of my hand. I was looking down the empty road that disappeared around a corner and out of the valley with a terrible sinking feeling. What if today was the day that the butterman came? He would pass by with a sack bulging and oily with fresh, sweet butter, and my hands would be empty with not a speck of bread left to dip into the sweet yellow mounds. Just then, around the corner came a figure, a pack slung over his back, and what looked like a sack in one of his hands. Do you think it's the butterman? I scrambled down from my perch quick as a goat and ran down the road to greet him. It was my father, back from across the mountains. He had a sack of flour thrown over his back. In his other hand he held a straw basket with some carrots and onions and turnips nestled in the bottom, and best of all, there was a piece of wax paper folded up, which could mean only one thing: meat. Can see his father coming from a distance, carrying all the different food that he brought. I wonder what they're going to make from it. At home, it was a celebration. My father placed the fat new flour sack on the floor in the corner while he told us about the farm across the mountains where he had gone to work. I could hardly imagine the place he described, a farm with big, flat fields that stretched into the distance, and water that came not from the sky but out of tin barrels on wheels. While he talked, your Mahalou set the big couscous pot on the metal ring over the fire. She chopped 1 onion and 2 carrots, then carefully set the rest of the vegetables aside for another day. That night we had the best couscous you can imagine, and I ate until my belly was as taut as the drums that are played in the ahidus. Isn't that like an amazing meal? Have you ever had a really good meal, a really good celebration like that? Maybe this past Thanksgiving? I shifted in my Baba's lap to get more comfortable, and I said to him, "But what about the butterman?" "Well, Nora, I'm not sure if the butterman ever came by, but I do know that the rain clouds did. Even in Tamazirt, it doesn't stay dusty and dry forever. In the months after Bahalou came back, the rain fell, then stopped, then fell again. At first it just sprinkled, dampening down the dust. Then it rained harder. The rainwater started to soak in and soften the ground. By the time the next planting season came around, the stream near our house rose high on its banks, and the soil in the fields was a soft, moist brown. That spring, even though I had grown taller, the wheat in the fields grew as high as my head. We had plenty of flour and some left over. Your Bahalou took the extras to the souk, the marketplace, and used the money he earned to buy another cow. Then Mahalou started to make butter again, and the butter jar was full. That must have taken a very long time. Longer than the time it takes to prepare a couscous dinner, that's for sure," he said, patting me on the head. Just then I heard my mama's key in the lock. Home from work. And my baba stood up and piled the fluffy couscous onto a big round platter and covered it with meat, carrots, turnips, onions, and all kinds of other delicious things. Dinner is served, he said, and placed the splendid dish on the table. But even as we sat around the steaming platter with our spoons held high, we had to wait just one more minute, just long enough to say our blessing. Bismillah, in the name of God. My father and mother and I all say it together, and the wait is over. We raise our spoons and dig in. We eat and eat until we are full, and there is always some left to save for our lunch tomorrow. What an amazing feast it looks like. And what a great story of waiting. There's a lot of people waiting in this story, right? Waiting for people to show up, waiting for food to be done, waiting for butter to be made. Lots of waiting, and it's a great reminder for this season of Advent where we are waiting for Jesus, waiting for Christmas, and waiting for the celebration that comes with all of that. So what a great start to this Advent season. Stay tuned next week. We'll have another story time, another children's message. In the meantime, you can take a look at our website for all sorts of stuff that's up there. Take care, and I'll see you all next week.